about the underground Dark Pyramid in Alaska, called and told me that his once military pilot father.
They found something beneath the Antarctic ice that rewrites all of human history, and the governments who know about it have been hiding it for over 70 years. A dying soldier made one phone call before he passed. What he described left an Emmy Award-winning journalist speechless.
And wherever he is, I know that his wife is working out some sort of an agreement now with the University of Texas.
Then another witness came forward. Then another. Then another. Now at 81 years old, she is finally releasing everything. The coordinates, the testimonies, the proof. What they found down there will change the way you see the world forever. And they never wanted you to know. In 1982, a United States Navy flight engineer was on a routine supply run over Antarctica. The mission was straightforward: move equipment and personnel between McMurdo Station and a remote research camp deep in the interior of the continent. It was the kind of flight the crew had done many times before. Cold, functional, unremarkable. But somewhere over the ice sheet, a mechanical fault forced the aircraft down early onto an exposed ridge. The conditions were severe. Temperatures low enough to burn exposed skin within seconds, wind battering the fuselage from every direction. The crew got to work on the repairs. There was no reason to linger. You fix the problem and you leave. While the others worked, the flight engineer stepped away from the aircraft and looked out across the ridge. Something caught his eye. On a rise in the distance, shapes broke the skyline that did not match the surrounding landscape. They were geometric, symmetrical, too angular and too regular to be the result of wind erosion or natural ice formation. He moved closer, close enough to make out what appeared to be the upper section of a large structure, partially exposed where decades of wind and shifting ice had stripped the surface away. Whatever it was solid, it was clearly manufactured, and it was made of a material that was neither ice nor rock. Before he could get any closer, the radio crackled. Orders came through to return to McMurdo immediately. No explanation was given. When the aircraft landed, intelligence officers were already on the ground waiting for them. The crew was separated and debriefed individually. Their flight logs were classified. Additional non-disclosure agreements were signed, and the instruction they were each given was simple and absolute. This never happened. The flight engineer kept that secret for nearly 2 decades. He returned to civilian life, kept his head down, and said nothing. But by the late 1990s, he was retired in his 70s and aware that his time was running out. He made a decision that would eventually set off a chain of events lasting more than 20 years. He picked up the phone and called Linda Moulton Howe. Linda Moulton Howe is not a fringe figure. She is an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist with a career spanning more than 4 decades. She studied at Stanford University and built her reputation through rigorous, evidence-based reporting on topics that sit at the edge of what mainstream journalism is willing to touch. She has interviewed military personnel, government officials, and scientists across the United States and internationally. Her approach has consistently been document first, publish second. She does not rush. She does not speculate beyond what her sources can support. When the flight engineer reached out to her in 1998, she treated the contact the same way she treated every other lead, with methodical skepticism and a determination to verify before drawing any conclusions. She interviewed him over multiple sessions, recording everything. She cross-referenced his account against publicly available military records. She confirmed his service history with the United States Navy. She verified that he had been stationed with Antarctic Development Squadron 6, known as VXE-6, the unit responsible for logistics and flight operations on the continent during that period. His account included specific coordinates for the location of the ridge, exact dates, and the names of other crew members who had been on the flight with him. According to Linda, every detail she was able to check came back consistent. But Linda knew that a single testimony, however credible, was not enough to stand on. One person's account, even a verified one, even from a source with a clean record and no obvious motive to fabricate, is still just one account. She filed the testimony away. She told nobody. And she waited. What she was waiting for, whether she knew it consciously or not, was corroboration. Independent confirmation from a separate source who had no knowledge of the flight engineer's account. someone who had not been briefed on what he saw, who had not read a transcript of his interview, who had arrived at the same or a similar conclusion through an entirely different path. In investigative journalism, that kind of independent corroboration is the difference between a story and a rumor. Linda understood that distinction better than most. It is worth spending a moment on the geography and logistics of all this, because Antarctica is not a place that invites casual scrutiny. It is the most remote continent on Earth. Access is tightly controlled. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959 and now ratified by more than 50 countries, designates the continent as a zone of peaceful scientific research. Military activity is officially prohibited, with the exception of logistical support. The research stations operating there are run by national science programs and are, at least on paper, open to international cooperation. What this means in practice is that Antarctica operates within a framework that is broadly transparent at the surface and almost entirely opaque underneath it. The people who work there are bound by contracts, security agreements, and institutional cultures that do not encourage talking. The continent is vast. Flights are limited. Oversight from the outside world is minimal. Against that backdrop, the silence the flight engineer maintained for nearly 20 years is not particularly surprising. The structure of Antarctic operations is designed, whether intentionally or not, to make silence the path of least resistance. You sign the papers, you collect your pay, you go home, and you get on with your life. Most people do exactly that. What made the flight engineer different was the diagnosis. Linda has not publicly disclosed the nature of his illness, but it is clear from the timeline that he reached out to her, knowing he did not have long. The decision to speak was not impulsive. He had clearly thought about it for years. He chose Linda specifically, not because she was the most prominent journalist he could find, but because he trusted her. He had followed her work. He believed she would handle what he told her with the seriousness it deserved, and that she would not publish it recklessly or sensationally without the evidence to back it up. That trust and the careful, unhurried way Linda received it is really where this entire story begins. Not with the structure on the ridge, not with the intelligence officers on the tarmac at McMurdo, but with a dying man deciding that the truth was more important than the papers he had signed 30 years earlier. And with a journalist who had the discipline and the patience to wait for the moment when one testimony could become something more. She had no idea how long that would take. She had no idea how many others would eventually follow. But she filed the recording away. She kept her notes, and she waited. It did not happen all at once. There was no moment where a group of people sat down together and decided to come forward collectively. It was slower than that, and in some ways more unsettling for it. Over the course of roughly 20 years, individuals began contacting Linda Moulton Howe one by one, each arriving independently, each carrying a piece of something they could not fully explain, and each entirely unaware that anyone else had already spoken to her. The first thing that struck Linda about these contacts was not what they were saying. It was the fact that they were saying it at all. These were not people with an obvious interest in going public. They were not looking for attention or trying to build a following. In most cases, they had spent years, sometimes decades, saying nothing. They had signed agreements. They had built careers and families and lives around keeping their mouths shut. What changed in almost every case was the same thing that had changed for the flight engineer. Time was running out. Age, illness, the growing awareness that the grave was closer than it used to be. And with that awareness came a question that proved harder to live with than they had expected. What happens to what I know when I'm gone? Linda became the answer to that question for a remarkable number of people. Word of her work spread quietly through the networks that connect former military personnel, retired scientists, and the contractors who moved between both worlds. She was known as someone who would listen without dismissing, verify without sensationalizing, and protect a source's identity with absolute consistency. She had never burned a source. She had never published something a contact had asked her to sit on. That reputation, built over decades, was what opened doors that would otherwise have stayed permanently shut. A geophysicist came to her with data that had never been published and never would be through official channels. He had been part of a survey team running ice-penetrating radar across a section of the Antarctic ice sheet as part of what was described to him as a standard glaciological study. Ice-penetrating radar is a well-established scientific tool. It sends radio waves down through the ice and measures how they reflect back, allowing researchers to map what lies beneath the surface: bedrock topography, ice thickness, subglacial lakes. The results from his survey showed something his instruments were not supposed to find. Beneath the ice, at significant depth, his equipment was detecting cavities. Not small pockets or the kind of irregular voids that form naturally in glacial environments. These were large, geometrically regular spaces. The dimensions were consistent in ways that natural cave formation simply does not produce. When he flagged the readings to his supervisor, the reaction was not curiosity or excitement. The supervisor's face, by his account, went pale. Within hours, the data had been classified. His team was reassigned, and he never saw those readings again. He spent years trying to make sense of what he had seen and what the response to it meant. By the time he found his way to Linda, he had largely made his peace with the fact that the official explanation, that there was no official explanation, was itself a kind of answer. A Navy construction battalion worker described a deployment that bore no resemblance to any scientific mission he had ever been part of before. Construction battalions, commonly known as Seabees, are the units the US military uses for building and engineering work in difficult or remote environments. Their presence in Antarctica is not unusual in itself. They have supported research infrastructure on the continent for decades. But this particular assignment was different. He was sent to a location miles from any established research station, with no scientific briefing, no ice core mission, no stated research objective of any kind. The operation he was part of involved drilling straight down, deep. When the shaft reached its target depth, he was lowered down to assist with equipment at the bottom. What he found there stopped him cold. The walls of the shaft had transitioned from natural ice to something else. A smooth, metallic-looking surface. Manufactured, deliberate. The kind of precision that does not come from geology. He stood there, and the thought that went through his head, as he later told Linda, was simple and impossible in equal measure. Someone built this. A scientist connected to Argentina's Esperanza base, one of the permanent research stations on the Antarctic Peninsula, told Linda about something that had happened repeatedly over the course of his time working on the continent. Ice cores, cylindrical samples drilled from deep within the ice sheet and used to study historical climate data, occasionally produced material that did not belong in any standard scientific report. Artifacts, objects recovered from layers of ice dated to more than 12,000 years ago. Each time it happened, the procedure was the same. Military personnel arrived. The samples were confiscated. No logs were filed. No reports were written. No papers were published. The samples simply disappeared, and the researchers involved were left with a very clear understanding that they were not to pursue the matter further. Pilot who had flown missions across the continent described a restricted zone that appeared on none of the public navigation charts. An area of significant size where civilian aircraft were forbidden entirely and where military flights required a level of clearance that almost nobody in his acquaintance actually held. He had asked once what was down there. The answer he received from a superior was 4 words long: sensitive research. Stop asking. He did stop asking, at least officially, but he did not stop thinking about it. The location of that restricted zone, as he described it to Linda, corresponded with areas that other witnesses had independently identified. That last detail mattered enormously. None of these people knew each other. Linda was meticulous about that. She did not introduce sources to one another. She did not share the details of one testimony with another witness before they spoke. The corroboration that was building across these accounts was entirely organic. A geophysicist in one part of the world describing underground voids. A construction worker describing manufactured walls at the bottom of a drill shaft. A scientist describing the systematic suppression of anomalous ice core findings. A pilot describing a no-fly zone that officially did not exist. Each account arrived separately from a different person in a different professional context, covering a different aspect of what was happening on that continent, and yet they were all pointing, with increasing specificity, toward the same conclusion. Something was buried beneath the Antarctic ice. It was structured, it was ancient, and the people responsible for managing that knowledge had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure it stayed buried in every sense. Linda sat with this accumulating body of testimony and understood that she was holding something serious, not because any single account was conclusive on its own, but because the pattern across all of them was. Patterns of that kind, in investigative journalism, are rarely coincidental. When unconnected people describing unconnected experiences keep arriving at the same destination, the explanation is usually not that they all independently invented the same fiction. The more straightforward explanation is that they all encountered the same reality. But she still did not have the one thing that would pull it all into a single coherent picture. The individual testimonies were fragments. Compelling, credible, independently verified fragments, but fragments nonetheless. What she needed was a source with enough institutional knowledge and enough direct access to explain not just what individual witnesses had seen, but what it all meant. What the operation as a whole looked like from the inside. In 2016, she received a message that changed the nature of everything she had been building. A retired NORAD officer with classified clearance and direct involvement in Antarctic operations in the early 2000s that do not appear in any public record reached out to her. His identity is the one Linda has protected more carefully than any other in her entire career. When he began speaking, she understood why. His testimony did not just add another piece to the existing picture. It was the frame that made every other piece make sense. Every isolated account, every unexplained detail, every fragment from 2 decades of patient investigation suddenly connected. Not because he had heard the other testimonies, he had not, but because what he had seen and been briefed on was the larger operation that all those individual experiences had been small windows into. What he described, and what Linda has since compiled alongside every other testimony she has gathered, forms the basis of an account that she spent the better part of another decade deciding how and when to tell. The NORAD officer's testimony arrived at a moment when Linda had already spent nearly 2 decades quietly accumulating accounts that no official body had ever acknowledged. What he brought was not just another fragment. It was context. Institutional context. The kind that only comes from someone who has operated at a level where the individual pieces are visible as part of a larger whole. According to what he told Linda, based on his direct involvement and the briefings he had received, beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet at considerable depth, there are multiple structures of artificial origin, not geological anomalies, not unusual ice formations. Structures built with intention and engineered with a degree of precision that places them entirely outside any natural explanation. More than that, they are old, far older than the ice that now covers them. The structures predate the last ice age, which means they were standing when Antarctica was not the frozen continent it is today. Geological and paleoclimatological research has long established that Antarctica was once a temperate landmass, with rivers, vegetation, and conditions capable of supporting life. That was more than 12,000 years ago. To put that in terms that are easier to hold in your mind, it is thousands of years before the first Sumerian cities, thousands of years before the earliest Egyptian dynasties, before every civilization that history currently recognizes as ancient. Whatever was built there was built by someone operating at a level of sophistication that our existing timeline of human development does not account for. According to the NORAD officer, the structures were first detected in the 1940s during Operation High Jump, the large-scale American military expedition to Antarctica that ran from 1946 into 1947. The operation was led by Admiral Richard Byrd and officially framed as a training exercise and research mission to establish American presence on the continent and assess its strategic value. The publicly stated objectives were straightforward enough, but according to this source, seismic surveys conducted during that expedition returned anomalies deep beneath the ice that nobody could explain through conventional geology and that nobody at the time was prepared to discuss openly. Those readings were classified, and what followed over the next 7 decades was a covert operation of extraordinary scale and duration. The United States, Russia, and more recently China have all, according to this account, been running recovery operations in Antarctica that have no connection to the scientific programs operating under the Antarctic Treaty. Not research, in the conventional sense, recovery. Archaeological excavation and technological retrieval, conducted entirely in parallel with the public-facing science that the world is allowed to see. The structures discovered are not modest in scale. What has been found, based on the picture assembled from this testimony and the others Linda had already gathered, appears to be an extensive complex. Buildings, infrastructure, evidence of a civilization so advanced and so far removed from what appears in any history book that the implications for our understanding of human development are, to put it plainly, enormous. A military contractor who had worked on a classified drilling operation in 2003 agreed to speak to Linda, but only after receiving a terminal cancer diagnosis. He could not, he told her, take what he had seen with him. He had been lowered into a shaft drilled through the ice to access what his team's briefing described as a geological anomaly. The descent took time. The platform dropped slowly, foot by foot, the daylight above narrowing and then disappearing entirely. The walls were ice, cold, blue-veined, featureless. Then, more than a mile down, the ice ended. Not gradually. It simply stopped. The walls shifted to something smooth and faintly reflective. A surface with a quality that caught his headlamp in a way that ice does not. The temperature in the shaft changed. The sound changed. The air itself felt different. In the way that stepping from one room into another feels different, even before you consciously register what has changed. He stepped off the platform into a space that was unmistakably not natural. The cavity around him was large. On the walls there were markings, symbols, geometric patterns that nobody on his team recognized as belonging to any known writing system. The team stood in silence, their flashlights pushed back a darkness that had not been touched in thousands of years. And then, set into the far wall, he saw a doorway. Not a crack or a gap in the rock. A constructed entrance, framed and deliberate, leading somewhere deeper into the structure. His team did not have the clearance to go further, but he watched as other personnel, scientists and military staff in specialized equipment prepared to enter through it. They moved with the unhurried efficiency of people who had done this before. He was sent back up to the surface. He signed a new non-disclosure agreement. He was paid a substantial bonus. And he said nothing for years until the diagnosis made the agreement feel irrelevant. What he told Linda was straightforward. People should know we found something down there, something that changes everything we think we know about history. The testimonies did not stop there. A satellite imagery analyst told Linda he had observed certain Antarctic coordinates being actively removed from publicly available data, not simply reduced in resolution, but deliberately obscured. He had seen the original images before they were processed. The shapes visible in those originals were rectilinear, formed, engineered-looking. When he raised the issue with his supervisors, he was told the areas in question were under special access protocols and that it was not his concern. A material scientist who had briefly worked with samples recovered from Antarctic operations described alloys that matched nothing in any existing database. The corrosion resistance of the materials was beyond anything in current engineering. The structural properties should not have been achievable with known manufacturing processes. A logistics coordinator working within the National Science Foundation's Antarctic program came across equipment manifests that corresponded to no research mission she was aware of. Industrial excavation machinery, sealed transport containers moving under armed military escort, shipments routed entirely through Department of Defense channels with no scientific oversight attached to them at any point. By 2020, Linda had more than 15 testimonies that she considered credible. She had verified coordinates. She had confirmed names and institutional affiliations. She had a body of evidence that, taken together, described one of the most significant and sustained cover-ups in modern history. And then, her sources began to die. The Navy flight engineer, the man on the ridge, the person whose phone call in 1998 had set all of this in motion, died in 2019. NORAD officer whose single testimony had given 2 decades of scattered accounts of their coherence and their shape, died in 2022. Others were in serious decline. Hospital stays, hospice care, fading faculties. Linda, now in her 80s, found herself in a position she had not anticipated and could not ignore. She was becoming the last person alive who held all of it together. The last thread connecting what these people had seen to the world they had seen it on behalf of. That realization did not just motivate her, it frightened her, because what was at stake was not just her own investigation, it was the testimony of people who had chosen at the end of their lives to trust her with something that had cost them years of silence, and in some cases, a great deal more than that. If she waited any longer, all of it would simply cease to exist. In a 2023 interview, she put it directly. She had a responsibility to make sure their testimonies survived. The men who had spoken to her had trusted her with the truth. She could not let that truth die with them. In late 2023, she began putting together what she has described as a comprehensive Antarctic report, assembling every testimony, every coordinate, every operation name, and every piece of evidence gathered across 25 years of investigation. In early 2024, she began releasing portions of it through her platform, earthfiles.com. She published the specific coordinates where witnesses had reported exposed structures or access points. She shared documents from Operation High Jump with redacted sections pointing toward objectives well beyond the official mission description. She presented anonymized testimony transcripts with enough verifiable detail to establish the credibility of the sources behind them. She compiled satellite imagery showing deliberate data obscuration over the exact areas her sources had identified, and she issued a direct challenge to independent researchers, scientists, and other nations with satellite and radar capability. The evidence, she said, is there. She told the world where to look. The response from every government implicated in her account was identical. Complete silence. No denials, no corrections, no legal action, no official statement of any kind. For a journalist of Linda's profile and track record to publicly accuse multiple world governments of conducting a 70-year cover-up involving ancient structures and recovered technology, and to receive no formal response whatsoever, is itself a notable fact. Discrediting a public figure with a verifiable career and documented sources is not a complicated exercise for a government press office. A single clear statement contradicting her claims would be straightforward to produce. None was produced. Linda has said that the silence is the most significant confirmation she could have received. If the account were straightforwardly false, addressing it would be easy. The choice not to address it suggests a calculation that engaging with the investigation carries risks that staying silent does not. Independent researchers began examining her coordinates. Amateur analysts working with publicly available satellite tools reported anomalies in the areas she had identified. Scientists who submitted formal requests for historical radar data from those locations found the requests denied on national security grounds, an unusual classification for geological information from a continent that is, officially, dedicated entirely to peaceful scientific research. Linda Moulton Howe, at 81 years old, has deposited copies of her complete investigation, including the identities of sources who gave posthumous permission to be named, with multiple institutions. The information will survive regardless of what happens to her. She is currently working on a documentary presenting the full body of testimony. She has been clear about what she is and is not asking for. She is not asking anyone to simply take her word for it. She is asking people to look at the testimonies, to look at the credentials of the people behind them, and to ask themselves what the most reasonable explanation is for the pattern those testimonies describe. The witnesses are mostly gone now, but what they saw and what they chose to say about it before the end has been documented and preserved. Whether the full picture ever becomes part of the public record in an official sense remains to be seen. What is already part of the record is this. Across 25 years, a significant number of people with verified military and scientific backgrounds, none of whom knew each other, all independently described pieces of the same thing. And one journalist had the patience, the discipline, and the sense of responsibility to make sure none of it was lost.